air was brilliantly clean. The sky was bright blue. Everything looked just wonderful, beautiful.
It was probably the greatest grassland the world had ever seen, and I think that when the wind blew over it, it was like sort of music. The player piano of the keys going down. It was like music being played before it. And just in its birthday suit, this grassland, which most American explorers called a wasteland, a desert, was an extraordinary thing. It was the second biggest ecosystem in North America.
When there was a lot of that tall grass, like my dad always, he would tell people, when I came here, he'd hide a man on a horse.
It was level and pretty, and the grass was beautiful. We had tall grass. They thought they'd all get rich or wealthy. There was no reason not to think so at that time because the grass was great for the cattle.
The grass was buffalo grass, and it was so good, it was unbelievable, it was so thick. When they got there, Dad said, "I ain't never moving again."
My mother told us that the soil was so beautiful that if you could stick she just said a butcher knife down in it and drop a seed in it and everything would just grow.
The 19-teens and 1920s were a time of enormous development on the southern plains. Areas that had been cattle grazing areas were being plowed for agriculture for the very first time. And you have enormous development of towns and cities, a large population coming into the area, many of whom hadn't farmed before, so this was a new experience for them. So you had a population on the plains that was essentially a new population in that era.
My parents were pretty typical of that time. They came out from Missouri in 1921 and became wheat farmers. My father said he'd had 40 acres in Missouri and he could have 160 acres out in Beaver County, and he just thought that was wonderful. And for about 10 years had bumper wheat crops and did very well.
They had plowed up all the buffalo grass in the effort to make more money and get rich off of wheat. The government encouraged them, too, to do this.
The government of the United States had been behind the westward movement all along. I mean, it was part of a grand scheme to bring the West into the purview of the United States. And that meant basically turning the West into agricultural production. That's the foundation for whatever we wanted to come out of the West, were farms, people living on those farms. So the government had been promoting this since the days of the Homestead Act, you could even say since Lewis and Clark.
The land was very good land, practically virgin land, hadn't been broken out in many years. Harvests up until that time were marvelous. Wheat at 50, 60 bushel an acre, where in Kansas, the wheat country, it might have been 30 bushel an acre, to give you an example, so that everything looked rosy.
They commanded technology, they commanded the land, and they were producing wheat on a scale that, in their own minds, promised prosperity and comfort for years to come. This is, in many ways, the American dream, to have your own land and be a farmer and till the soil and prosper.
Boom time.
Those clouds would be just way high, just like a cloud was, and then just come in rolling in, and they were the dust, and not clouds, they were dust. But they were all bad. They just came in and you were, well, it wasn't something you used to. They were just something very, very different.
I rode my horse to a friend's house and was coming home about a quarter of a mile from home, and back in the north was this big black cloud. It looked like there was nothing behind it. And I really kicked my horse and got in, put my horse in the lot and got in the house, and that hit. And it was just like I don't know what, it hit, whew, a big puff, and then just settle down, no wind, and you could just see dust falling everywhere on the kitchen table, and that was it. There was no wind, just like that. Big puff, and then nothing. And dust, you could just see the dust falling on the kitchen table. And it was scary before, seeing that cloud. It didn't look like there was anything behind it. But it hit and just stopped.
It just looked like a rolling bank, and it would taper off at the edges, but it was higher in the middle. And when they were really bad, there were birds and things flying in front of them, and they were trying to get away from the storm, so we knew it was going to be pretty bad. You could always tell by the way the cattle and the horses went to the corner of the pasture or field, wherever that was farthest away from that way that storm was coming. So we always knew by watching the cattle or the horses what was coming.
We liked to stay out till it hit, us kids, but we'd be close to the house where we could get in and stay inside until it let up. After an hour or two, it'd let up to where there'd be some light, but it'd be just as black as if you'd turn all the lights off in here. I mean, blacker than that. It just, you couldn't see nothing when they had first hit, most of them.
Kind of exciting, kind of like a big thunderstorm. Kind of look forward to it. The way that the dust storm came wasn't suddenly. You could see in the distance a cloud that was on the ground. It looked like a regular old black summer thunderstorm coming.
I was out walking on the prairie with some friends just to have something to do on Sunday afternoon. So anyway, we looked over to the horizon where some clouds were building, and we thought, oh, good, rain. But no, it was not rain, it was dust. And it just kept coming and billowing up into the sky. And we realized we were in trouble, so we ran as fast as we could. And finally, the dust hit before we got to the porch we were headed for, but we made it. And we stood still until, well, it was just dark. We couldn't see each other. And so we stood there until we could see each other. And then we had to laugh because we had dirt everywhere. Eyes, nose, mouth, everywhere. Hair.
As I remember, the wind didn't blow all that hard. It just had a lot of dirt in it that had come from Nebraska or someplace. It wasn't our dirt. The dirt was too black for Oklahoma dust.
Oily chocolate talcum powder. And it had a certain feel to it that just permeated everything. It just would go through anything, and there's just not much they could do to stop it.
The dust was like talcum powder. It got into everything, on me. You couldn't escape it. It got into everything. It seemed like at times there was kind of an acrid feeling or a smell in the air, depending on, some storms were more severe than others, and the lighter ones didn't faze us. It was when we had those heavy black ones that you just felt like you couldn't get your breath, and that's when we put the wet towels over our heads.
It was so bad that, all the time, Mom would dampen sheets and put over, well, we had this old iron bedstead, and she'd put sheets over us. And the next morning we'd crawl out, just be covered with dirt.
If you left your shoes out, if you went to bed and left your shoes out, in the morning when you got up, you had to empty them out.
We did everything to keep that we could think of to keep the dust from getting in what we ate. And when we slept at night, our pillow, you could see the outline of our heads on the pillows because the dust would settle in. And that's the way it did. It would come in and then it would settle down. and get on the floor everywhere. My sister slept with my parents. Doretta was probably about a year old, and the ceiling of our house was covered with sheetrock, and it was so full of dirt between the sheetrock and the roof that one night while I was sleeping in the next room, I heard Daddy yell, "Grab that kid, Mom." And he hit the floor and ran across out of that piece where that piece of sheetrock was straight above their bed. And they got out from under it, but that sheetrock fell on the bed, and it was probably 3 or 4 inches deep with dirt. And they got out from under it, and I think that's what caused us to move to town, because I don't think Daddy ever put that piece of sheetrock back up on the ceiling.
You didn't keep a house clean. You couldn't with that dust in there all the time. We just tried to wash real good all the time and keep things as clean as we could. But you had to sweep every time you turned around and mop the house and all those things to keep the dust out.
Those houses weren't well made, and it would come through the windows, it'd come through the cracks in the doors. Other places, no, you'd have dust. And I remember, I think my father taking a shovel, a scoop shovel that you'd use for grain to scoop out the dirt on the floor of the house after a storm.
And I've held a scoop shovel while Mom swept dirt out of the house, and we put it, instead of using a dustpan, we'd use a scoop shovel.
My sister and I, on a clear day, on a Saturday morning, would start at the top and take a broom. We didn't have a vacuum in those days, and sweep the dirt off of the windowsill and take the curtains down, take them out and shake them and leave them out a while. And on the dresser, we'd sweep it off. There's thick on the dresser. And we'd sweep it off. And then we'd get a shovel or a scoop and scoop it into a wash tub, big wash tub, and carry it out. Then we'd go start again and go from the top and go down and get a much smaller amount the second time. And then we'd take the dust cloths and wipe the furniture off, and everything had been shaken, and hang the curtains again. And about then the dirt would have perhaps be blowing again. It was you're pretty much defeated to keep it clean. I did a cleaning for some women in town at that time that year, and you do the same thing. You start at the top and push the dirt down and let it fall and scrape it up, dump it, come back for more. And you'd end up, of course, by washing it if it was a linoleum floor.
One of our neighbors, a rancher's wife, who was of German extraction and such a good housekeeper, said she was just humiliated when her husband brought his foreman or one of his business associates in, and they were making some plans about where to move the cattle. And she said they were at the dining room table, and they weren't using pencil and paper. They were writing in the dust on the table, and she was humiliated.
But you couldn't keep it clean. There was no, whenever we set the table, now this is when you put the plates out, we didn't have a knife, a fork, and spoon. We had a spoon, and we turned the plates upside down on the table so the sand wouldn't get in it before we ate. It was that bad.
When we went to set the table, we turned the plates upside down, because if you didn't, there'd be dirt by the time you got the meal on the table. The idea of keeping everything clean, you did the best you could. And I remember my folks laughing and saying, whoever eats the most gets the most dirt. All of our mothers were experienced at hanging up wet sheets over the windows to keep as much of the dirt from coming in as possible. And if there were a baby in the house, they nearly always had their crib covered with something damp to keep the dust from settling in on them.
I was in charge of my trying to help keep my younger brother clean. Mother would say, "Will you take Doogie up and get him cleaned up?" And so he and I went up, and his ears were dusty, and he just was furious with me. He was 6 years younger, and that dust had to have accumulated over maybe a couple of weeks.
I had this ruptured appendix, which was operated on, and then I acquired peritonitis. And then I got dust pneumonia, and I can't really distinguish very well the dust pneumonia from the rest of the things that were so bad. I remember them coming and getting me on a stretcher and carrying me down the stairs, and it was a day when the sun was shining. I remember that because I felt the sun on my face. They said, "Well, you're lucky because the dust's not blowing today, so we can operate." If it had been, I don't know what would have happened to me. They sealed all the windows with adhesive tape, this wide, white, heavy cotton tape they used to use that was murder to get off of you. And they sealed all the windows. And then, at least in my room, they hung wet sheets in front to catch the dust. And it still got in. I know that the only spot that I could see that was clean in my room was a little round spot on the pillow where the back of my head was. You probably didn't even realize that you were inhaling as much as you did when the dust is everywhere, and you couldn't escape it. And you had to breathe. It was just like having pneumonia, only it had the cause of it was dust. You either lived or you died. They couldn't do much for you except, try to feed you and keep you as comfortable as they could. But as far as any real doctoring or nursing, a nurse could make you comfortable, but doctors, I think, were helpless. Just like the farmers, they were helpless against dust pneumonia or dust.
I got paid $75 a month. And part of the time, my checks weren't good. I had to wait maybe 3 or 4 months to get them cashed. Well, they'd give us a check and just tell us to hold it till they had the money. Even when I married, I think I had 4 checks yet that hadn't been paid. I taught in country schools, and we had probably 4 or 5 miles. None of them came farther than the 4 or 5 miles, most of them a mile. And most of them walked to school. And lots of times I'd pick them up as I was coming along in the car and take them to school. But it gets so bad you couldn't even see to drive. You couldn't see the sides of the road with your lights on. You couldn't tell whether you was on the road or whether you was off the road. We'd just turn out school. And parents would come get their children because we couldn't leave them in there. We couldn't turn them loose.
And I remember I went to a 2-story school, and there was a big stairway up from the front door that went up to the 2nd floor. And they thought it was safer for us when those storms really hit to get us out of our room and down under the stairs, kind of. And I remember when it got worse that the teacher told us to sit down and put our head on our knees, put our arms around our legs, and if the storm knocked the building down, that we'd be safe under this stairwell. But we didn't have to do that too often. It was just when they really thought that the wind was getting so strong it might knock the building over.
So every day we would get on dirt that was piled a little bit higher. I think probably at one time it got between 2 and 3 inches high. And every day we had to clean the dirt off of our desk. You didn't have paper towels like you do now or rags available. I mean, rags were at a commodity too. So, so you just wiped the desk off, and as a result, you had chapped arms. And but that's the way you got through to where you could put your paper down at least to where you could write on it then.
It was just constant dirt in the air. The wind was blowing. I remember being in school. The lights were on in our classroom in the middle of the day because it was dreary and dark. And I could look out the window and see, and the atmosphere was just beige. You couldn't see a blue sky. And I remember looking out and thinking, how depressing. And I was just maybe 8 years old or 9 years old, and I felt depressed, and I felt as if I couldn't breathe. So I told my teacher, I can't breathe. And she said, well, you need to go home. So she called my mother, and of course, Mom didn't have a car. I walked home. Mother put me to bed, but there was just a little bit of dust on the pillow, and it was just that we got used to the smell of dust. It was everywhere.
When we'd walk back and forth to school, we had a mile walk to school, and I would feel the dust stinging my legs, you know, and the wind bothering me, and the wind howling in the old, through the barbed wire fences and through the old deserted equipment like plows and stuff like that.
I was at school one day. We walked to school, and we cut across our pasture. I lived about a mile from school. And so school was out, and I thought my brother had already started home. So I saw the storm in the north, but I thought, I think I can beat that home. And I got about halfway home, and it hit. And it was dense enough that I became disoriented, and I wasn't sure whether I was going in the right direction anymore or not. When it rolled in, it picked up bits of gravel and dust, and it hit your bare face and legs and arms, and it hurt. It hurt. And I looked behind me, and I saw these car lights coming across the pasture. And I thought, someone is heading this way. When he got close enough, his headlights could shine on me. Then I stepped out into the light and found it was my uncle who had came to school to pick me up, and then found out that I had already started home. But I don't remember being afraid. I don't know. I just was going to cope with it the best I could. I never got caught in a storm again after I got caught in one. I learned.
We had fields that people moved away from and didn't take any care of at all. It'd blow up into mounds high as a man's head and clear down to subsoil around that. Good place to hunt arrowheads and Indian artifacts and so forth.
It was great times for guys who were hunting for arrow points at that time. They got very choosy. In normal times, point hunters find a broken point and they'll pick it up. But when you have so many hundreds and hundreds of arrow points to pick from, you would take only the perfect ones. And my older brothers made great collections of them.
I hunted arrowheads a lot as a kid because I could trade a pound coffee can full of good arrowheads for a knee-high pop. And the ground would be just smooth, but there'd be little wrinkles in it just where a one-way had gone, the bottom of where a one-way had gone, the rest of that topsoil blew away. And it was just down to hard pan. And then them arrowheads just be laying on top, and you could pick them up everywhere. I picked up a gold watch that opened, the case opened on the front and the back. It was a real thick watch. And I was in my uncle's car, and I could drive to Four Corners, which is about 3 or 4 miles down there from where he was farming. And I traded that gold watch for a knee-high grape pop. And my uncle went to get that watch back, and they had a little sham battle over that. But he busted my boo-high and told me anytime I found something like that to let him look at it first.
Everybody was in the same boat. Nobody had money to spend. We made our own fun. Always some family in the community would have a dance on Saturday night, and that was our entertainment.
The Chamber of Commerce planned a lot of events that were free. My dad had movies, free movies occasionally, and everybody would come. They were movies that John Deere furnished, or they were not Hollywood movies. They were advertising more than anything else. But they were free, and Dad would have pop, and it would get people to town, hoping that they can use their cream and egg money and buy a pair of shoes. And then after church on Sunday, everybody in town would drive, and we'd park in a circle around this pit. It was a absolutely barren, treeless, empty lot just outside of town. And women would bring potato salad and that sort of thing. Sometimes we had to eat in the cars if the dust was bad.
The way that the dust storm came wasn't suddenly. You could see in the distance a cloud that was on the ground. It looked like a regular old black summer thunderstorm coming. And it got increasingly darker until it was so dark that you couldn't see the hood of your car and you couldn't drive. And more dust, and the longer the ride, the higher the charge. Until finally it gets such a powerful charge that if you reach out to touch a car, the electricity will jump out about 6 inches to meet you and knock you right flat on your butt. So kids just loved to have people experience that excitement, and they deliberately try to charge up the cars and find a victim. That was fun. So my father went out one day to get a pail of water and touched that windmill and got knocked flat. And we in the house, we just thought it was hilarious. Quickly put a conduit from the windmill to the ground. He learned about electricity in a hurry.
Yeah, it would get you when it's just like a lot of the carpets are that hadn't been treated. You walk across the carpet and touch somebody on here, they don't like that very much. But us kids used to play with the windmill shutoff wire. And of course, the windmill wheel being metal, it would catch a lot of the static up there, and then it come down that metal wire, and we could hang on to that. It's like a spark plug wire. I mean, it snapped about that. It snapped a little ways to get to you if you got too close to that wire. So it was kind of an entertaining thing when we'd have kids come over. We'd see who was brave enough to touch it. The most fun was come up behind and hit somebody on the back of the ear with your finger. You'd jump about that far. Then the guy'd jump about that far. Kid. We used to do it for fun. So we might have been fooling with fire. I don't know, but we didn't know any better, and we thought it was fun.